Hi there, welcome back to the Working With Us podcast. My name is Paul Arneson, and this is an episode I've been really looking forward to show to you and for you to listen to because we are going to go to one of my absolute favorite countries in the world, New Zealand. So, back in the day, this is where I studied for my bachelor's degree, so I lived there for almost 4 years and I had a time of my life. In this episode, I am joined by Shireen Chua, who calls herself a cultural alchemist, and honestly, I think that's the perfect description for her work. So, let me tell you a little bit about Shireen. So, she has spent years now helping people and organizations navigate the complexities of cultural diversity and inclusion. She is the director of Third Culture Solutions, where she coaches leaders, builds intercultural intelligence, and helps teams thrive in today's globalized world. She has a PhD in organizational leadership and a deep passion for translating research into practical tools. So Shireen knows exactly how to turn cultural challenges into opportunities. In the episode, we look into the New Zealand culture, obviously, starting with something that you might already know quite a lot about, or at least you've heard about, and that's the All Blacks, namely the rugby team, the famous rugby team and their haka, the warrior dance they do before every game. And we're gonna explore what makes the Kiwi culture so unique. From the Māori traditions and their communal values to the more individualistic Anglo-Saxon influences, we talk about how these two cultures coexist and shape how the New Zealand workplaces have become. Shireen also shares some fascinating insights into the diversity of New Zealand, how Auckland actually is the home to more than 200 ethnicities, and what this means for how people in New Zealand work together. So, whether you're curious about Kiwi ingenuity, fascinated by New Zealand's history, or just looking for advice on building more inclusive teams, this episode is packed with insights. And as always, look at the show notes that you will find in the description of this episode. Either you're listening to this podcast or you're seeing it on YouTube, you'll find all the links in the description. Also, ways to connect with Shireen and to follow the podcast. So, without further ado, let's get started. Hey, Shireen, how are you today? So nice to see you. How are you?
Kia ora, Paul. Nice to see you too. Good evening from Aotearoa, New Zealand. I'm
Yeah,
doing
kia
really
ora.
well.
Yeah, it's the evening for you and the morning for me here. That's the nature of speaking to someone on the other side of the world for me at least.
Yes. I'm
Yeah.
just about to finish my day. So
Well, I'm very grateful that you took the time this evening to talk to me about the New Zealand culture of professionals and how it is to work with someone from New Zealand, the Kiwis, that is sort of commonly known as outside. But I wanted to start with something that everyone has heard about New Zealand in some sense, probably have heard about, and that's the All Blacks. The All Blacks, the famous rugby team, they have the war dance, the haka before the game, and I think everybody knows about that. So maybe for a lot of people, they see New Zealand, the first thing that comes to mind is the All Blacks. So, can you tell us a little bit about the All Blacks and sort of the significance of All Blacks in New Zealand in general?
well, the All Blacks are our national rugby team. So in New Zealand, rugby is pretty much our national sport. Maybe not so much in Europe, but in New Zealand, that is probably what every young boy and even young girl now aspires to want to become when they grow up, if they're any good at this. And it's been a rich journey of the sport aspect has been roller coaster. If you've been following the journeys. But we've had several chances to win the World Cup, and that's has a lot of national pride. Now, the haka, which you all see and most people have heard, is a fascinating and really important part of the All Black culture. But it was gifted to them by the Māori, the indigenous people of New Zealand. And there's been a whole range of either the celebration of culture, but there's also been some misappropriation of culture, and it just shows you that culture is such a rich but also polarizing conversation, and so it's really interesting to talk to you today about that. But the All Blacks, they play a rugby game that's oval shape, if no one has seen that. And we play that locally, professionally, as well as nationally. Um, what's been very exciting is that the women's rugby team won the World Cup. Not last year, the year before that, I think. And that was amazing. So there's been a rise of women's sport as well that is starting to supersede the crowds in the rugby games, the men ones.
Yeah. And then I didn't say that, but I actually used to live in New Zealand. I started in New Zealand, so I was there for almost 4 years. And
Yeah,
what I saw with the All Blacks, it is a religion in many ways, in terms of you sort of the following it has and the importance it has in everything. And when the World Cup is on, or an important game is on, is always people. I guess if it's a World Cup now that was in France, that during the time the games were played, there was no one. If you try to go to an office or whatever, it was closed, right? It would be something
it's
like that.
and I mean it's primarily rugby, but I think we are a sporting country, and sport plays a significant part of being in New Zealand. At the moment it's summer, so there's been some cricket going on, and last summer was the America's Cup sailing. So sport seems to be a really part of New Zealand culture in
Mm.
different ways. Yeah. And it's
No,
also a
that
unifying thing. It draws everyone together for good, but also I guess when we lose, I think sometimes we might be sore losers.
well, I mean,
I guess.
I think that is a trait of a small nation. I'm Norwegian myself, and we are not that many. We are, I think, 1 million more. I
Okay.
think 5.5 million that lives there, and very passionate about sports. And if
Yes.
it's a loss, yeah, it's a national mourning. So,
Yeah. So we are 5 million, just over 5 million as well.
oh yeah, you got past that now. Okay,
And Auckland is probably 1 million plus. So that's our largest city.
yeah.
So for anyone in Europe listening, you probably think this is a village.
Yeah, no,
But
Auckland
it's
is
really
it's
diverse, very super diverse. Yeah.
yeah, and that's where I lived as well. So I have a lot of good memories from New Zealand and Auckland, obviously, because that's sort of where I spent the most of my time as a student. And we can get into many things of my observations in there later in this conversation. But I wanted to also just now go on to start talk a little bit about the sort of the culture of New Zealand, especially when you think about what sort of the textbooks up through the years and studies and research that has been done about where a sort of a typical Kiwi professionals come from. And maybe you should also mention where the name Kiwi comes from as well, and what's the significance of that, because I think a lot of people that are listening to that maybe never been to New Zealand have probably met someone who says I'm a Kiwi,
Yes.
but you mentioned something to me just before we started this conversation about the sort of the diaspora of
Oh,
New
yeah.
Zealanders,
So
and
we're named Kiwi after a really small flightless bird. Google them, and it's got really big feet and a very long beak and no wings, so it can't fly. And it's a nocturnal creature. And so whenever we talk about being Kiwis, that's unique to New Zealand. And wherever the Kiwis are found in the world, I think they're uh, come from here. Anyway, in different parts of the world, when they talk about kiwis, they probably mean the kiwi fruit as well. And some people go, "Oh, we eat kiwis." And I think I remember some Americans talking about kiwis being kiwi fruit. And so when they said, "Oh, we love eating kiwi," and we're like, "No, you cannot eat our national bird because it's not." So if anyone's this is the power of culture and language and meaning. Kiwi can mean a bird, can mean a New Zealander, or can mean a fruit, which is the kiwi fruit, which did not actually originate here. I think it's also called the Chinese gooseberry, but we do export a lot of kiwi fruit to the world as well. But yes, New Zealand is small, but we're also super diverse. Similar to the cities like Toronto and Melbourne. But because we're so small in a city of 1 million, I think the last time that at the census, they talked about having about 200 different nationalities or ethnicities and 160 languages spoken in 1 million people plus. So quite condensed. And where I live, up the road, I remember seeing a picture in the newspaper, maybe about 5 years ago, of a high school, the most diverse high school. And it was just a sea of a global village. So we that what is a Kiwi? I am a Kiwi. I've lived here 36 years, but I'm actually Malaysian born. So I often describe myself as a Malaysian born Chinese Kiwi. So we are becoming very diverse in our globalization. So along with that, whether it's in New Zealand or anywhere in the world, wherever you travel, you're taking values with you, your worldviews. So this is why it's the richest, but also the most polarizing time for us to be understanding this whole culture. And what I talk about, the cultural agility. How do you learn to work together? How do you learn to go deeper than labels, stereotypes, and what some of the old textbooks say, which may no longer be so relevant?
Yeah, no, that's also one of the reasons why I started this podcast in the first place. All learning that I had, all my education that came actually from New Zealand about business and culture, at least, was kind of outdated when I started reading newer literature. Sort of there was a
Yes.
gap there in my learning, and that's why I wanted to speak to someone like yourself that can explain better to the listener what it actually means to be from somewhere, at least from your country, or to be a Kiwi and everything. But I think that if you also look at the historical context, like we have to also acknowledge, obviously, that New Zealand is a Anglo-Saxon country, was sort of explorers that came in there many years ago and settled down in New Zealand. They were all I don't remember, the first one was it James Cook or something, but there was like a lot of history there with settlements. But what they met when they came to New Zealand was, as you mentioned earlier, the Maori people, the indigenous tribe that was already living there. And I know obviously from historical learning about the history of New Zealand that that's sort of been a conflict that's been going on for many years. But also, just to mention that from the outset, I think it's interesting to see how the sort of the what you call is it Pakea, the sort of the yes, the one side of the Kiwi and then the Maori culture sort of merging together, or trying to at least merge together in some sense, because you have on one side the individualistic Anglo-Saxon culture, and then you have the communal, collective Maori culture. And I was also reading up on this before this conversation, that I was thinking it's an interesting way of looking at two cultures that is very on kind of opposite sides that are trying to live together and merge together. Can you say anything about that, like in terms of how maybe if you bunch Anglo-Saxon cultures together, it's very easy to say, oh, the New Zealanders or the Kiwis are probably all like the British or the Americans because they're all Anglo-Saxons. But
they're not.
But
And I
they're
think
not.
one of the thing that when you said, "Oh, we're an Anglo-Saxon country," I'm like, "Oh," because I think first and foremostly the Māori and the Morioris came and they were the first. They're the indigenous people here, way more than when Abel Tasman was the first one that came, and then Cook.
Tasman was, yes.
And so the treaty is our founding document, and there's a whole lot more detail which I won't go into, but there was there was a Declaration of Independence that was signed before, and so the treaty gives right for this partnership to take place. The tribes, the chiefs of Māori welcomed Cook, oh no, not Cook, Hobson and the relationship with the Queen, thinking they were equals. And one of the fascinating things is from my understanding of it, is that there was a deep misunderstanding of the treaty, because one was an oral culture, so made to sign something in a written culture. And so what they heard and intended and what was meant, and you have to remember in 1840, words of like sovereignty, which the British were talking about, looked and was understood very differently in culture. So the misunderstandings have continued, and underpinning that too, was a lot of settler greed, wanting land and a new tomorrow. But the founders, the people that wanted this treaty, was to make this place flourish, for both. And so when we often talk about the treaty, tangata whenua is the people of the land, indigenous. And it is an intercultural relationship with tangata tiriti. And tangata tiriti is not just the Pākehās, or Pākehās, everyone that is not Māori.
Mm.
And some would react and say, oh, that's an offensive word. No, they're just saying, this is us and this is you, but together we become we. And so there's been a real journey along the way. There's been a lot of, I guess, misunderstanding, and also out of that, when Māori lost a lot of the land, a lot of terrible things happened. And so today, it's a roller coaster ride. So before the last election, or before the pandemic, there was an actual cultural renaissance happening here. That even all of us are starting to learn Māori. We use Māori greetings. We are proud of learning about this part of our heritage. But there's also been a pivot and a swing away from celebrating the richness of this culture to saying we're all human beings. And so there's this thing happening, and I think it's probably happening everywhere around the world, because the world's under stress. We're all, fear from the pandemic, the economic, so it's pushing us backwards in our feeling safe in all the cultural differences that we see.
Yeah, and it's an interesting culture in that sense. Everything you mentioned there, and then the way that is sort of if you look at other culture where there also were indigenous tribes where they were treated very differently, and they were maybe not that open to whatever changes was coming in, not involuntarily or voluntarily, like okay, this is what we're gonna have to deal with. So if you look now, as you said, a little bit about what we are feeling today as different cultures around the world, and the stress and everything, how has sort of looking from the historical context, how has the culture been shaped to, if you look at a professional today growing up in New Zealand, getting into the workforce and and now we're going to talk about sort of, the specific characteristics of someone from a culture. How has that maybe impacted in some sense? Is it changing quite a lot? And can you sort of put some words to what you could expect from a professional Kiwi in a workplace setting?
So I think there's a lot of ways to answer this question, but one of the things to say is that in terms of culture, our national culture is not just one part of our identity. Our gender, where we grew up, our generation, how old we are, also influences how we see the world. So Kiwis that travel and become expats often do what is often the rite of passage, which is to go on an OE. After they finish university, they go traveling, or even before. They go to Europe, because some will have British passports from their grandparents. So they go and travel there. And some, they've found their niche in the world and have made their mark in London, New York, Germany, wherever. And by that time, if they've really settled into life beyond, New Zealand becomes too small. But the Kiwis that do go often are the ones that can afford to go. So you're generally your New Zealand, European Pākehās who can travel or who have ancestry to go passport. Now, interestingly, there's a whole bunch of Māori. Actually, there's more Māori in the Gold Coast, I think. They're all going there because they're working in the mines, and they're doing some good work there. So wherever you are, you'll find Kiwis. Now, often the general, sort of stereotype that
Yeah,
I've
let's
heard.
talk some stereotypes.
I don't know, because I haven't traveled to Europe as much as others do, but they often talk about very friendly, hardworking, generally sort of informal, and that's come from a background of a farming, agricultural, primary producing country. If you have seen the cultural detective lenses, they talked about the Kiwi culture, and this I think would be your New Zealand European culture is that they just get stuck into things. They're very earthy. They are modest. So then they were going to say we're just so brilliant. And they are restrained. So we're often reserved, not as sort of extroverted, I guess, as if you were just seen an Australian and New Zealand, you'll tell them very differently. One's more extroverted and we're more restrained, I think. Fairness is a core value, and they always talk about the number 8 fencing wire, Kiwi ingenuity, always trying to solve problems. So those cultural lenses are often how you would describe Kiwis. And they take what they've learned or grew up with here to the world. There's also some dark sides to that. I mean, with culture, there's this all of this good stuff. But for example, the restraint in New Zealand, there's the dark part of it. It's the tall poppy. So if you are absolutely shining and doing really well, they chop the tall poppies down. So in some ways, those that make it abroad, I think they tried to come back during COVID and find resettle here. Apart from the cost of living and life here is very hard. It's hard to fit in because the society here or culture here is that we don't like people to be so successful in some ways, which is quite a sad part to acknowledge. Yeah.
Also for the listeners, the tall poppy syndrome is very similar to the law of Jante that we have in Scandinavia, where you're not supposed to, you shouldn't show off in any sense. You should be very humble, and that's sort of like the same idea. I have a video on that as well, but it's a similar concept, and
similar in Japan. So I think every society has some degree of that. How strong that is actually adhered to is the question.
No, exactly that.
Different generations, you see it in different generations. I think the generational culture is the one that's most fascinating. The younger generation don't seem to do that as much.
I think one thing that you said that was interesting, and this is something that I guess is something that you might hear often if you say, "Oh, I'm from New Zealand," and then maybe the person you speak to have had some encounters with someone from Australia, and they might put you into the same category. Is that offensive? Because I'm just going to say from personal experience that if someone thinks I'm Swedish and I'm Norwegian, I'm not going to get offended because that's not my personality, but it's sort of wrong because I'm not Swedish, I'm Norwegian. So we're very proud of that. Is it like the same with this New Zealand, Australia in some sense?
I think we have a similar relationship like US and Canada. So we're the small brother, and in some ways it reveals some of our insecurities if we get offended if we're classified as Australians. But the fascinating thing is we're often forgotten. If you look at some of the world maps, they stop at Australia. And I think there's been quite a lot of jokes made out of that in that sense, and I guess that our maturity to handle being little is perhaps still young. We're a very young nation. Having just talked to some friends who visited Europe and was showing me their whole photo reel, I just thought we would never see any of those buildings that you've got for 800 years, in Germany and Czechoslovakia, all of those buildings, even after war, like we don't have anything that old. So the oldest that we've got is, I don't know, under 200 years old. So
Yeah.
so we're a young nation, architecturally and probably culturally as well. And
Yeah.
being remote makes it harder for cultures to really develop and mature.
I was
But
actually think,
somehow getting
yeah,
a lot of people coming here.
yeah.
We're very diverse.
No, my first impression coming to Auckland over a decade ago was the diversity of the
Yeah,
people I saw in the street. It was also at university where I studied. It was just the professors were from everywhere, but they looked like they were from everywhere. I'm not saying they were from everywhere. They were, as you said, they were Kiwis.
now, in Auckland City, you would see that. The further south you go, the less diverse it is.
Yeah,
And so if you had traveled further south, you wouldn't see as much diversity, although that's changing. The workforce shortage has meant that we are seeing a lot more people coming in to make their lives here. So um, the farmers, we're seeing a lot of Filipinos become share milkers, and also in our aged care. So the jobs draw people to come here, and
yeah,
so but it is diverse, and you notice it because we're in small city.
yeah. No,
Um,
no, it's very easy to see immediately. And I was also
but if you
thinking another.
yep,
So
go
yeah,
for it.
yeah, no, I was thinking another thing you mentioned there about the history of sort of being a young nation, and it's actually probably outdated. Obviously, I mentioned this earlier. Like one of the main studies that were done on culture many years ago was the Hofstede one.
Yeah,
And funnily enough, because I have this old book, he did an index called long-term orientation,
yeah,
which basically means like if you the top one would be China, something that preserves culture in many ways, like thinks about the old days and values sort of the and New
yeah.
Zealand was actually quite low on but that study was done in the 60s and 70s and I think published in the 80s. And we mentioned a little bit at the beginning about how the integration of, say, the Maori, which is the oldest culture. If you look at that culture, that's more than 200 years old, obviously. So do you think that in some ways that there is a shift happening now, that in terms of, say, that you don't really have a history of like old buildings and stuff, but maybe culturally you take things from the past and bring it into the new?
Well, I think this is a fascinating thing. So what Hofstede found is twofold. It has revolutionized our understanding of culture and organizations, and he's put words into different cultural values that exist. Um, but what's changing is the fact that New Zealand is more than the Pākehā. There, and that's why it's getting so complex. And this is what I've been researching and doing my study in, is that different parts of New Zealand, different cultures in New Zealand have got different value orientation. So you can't say New Zealand is a short-term or a long-term orientation because yes, the Māori, if you look at the strategic plans of some of our iwi, our tribe organized businesses, they plan 3 generations deep. So that's long-term orientation. And if you actually browse the New Zealand Herald at the moment, our biggest headache is our short-term thinking, which is shaped by our short election cycles in one sense. So they're making decisions that they get in and they have to show that well, this is what we think. They have to deliver something, and then they've got 1 year to do that, and then the next year is to campaign to win another election. So it's 3 years. So the news on Saturday is that the last government has committed to have a rail from the CBD to our airport. This government's just cancelled it. So that's quite short-term orientation because this is not the first time decisions like that have been overturned. And every time you do that, the price goes up exponentially. And so we still, transport's still a problem, public transport. So there's both long-term orientation and short-term. So I think that the moral of the story is that stereotypes are a starting point. So,
Yeah.
Hofstadter's 5 have been superseded by Trompenaars, and there's several others. I use culture mapping international, which is and Erin Meyer's got stuff. So they show polarities of different cultural values that might be national, but I think what we've got to start to see is that generation starts to infuse in it, because culture is not contained to just one part of us.
No.
Not this part's our generation. It's all of us. It's layers, and so I often talk about the fact that we are multi-dimensional beings, and who you interact with, start with the stereotypes, start with observations of who you meet, and then I just keep going, go deep, be curious, and if you see strange patterns of behavior, be curious enough to ask.
Yeah.
And if they're in conflict with you, particularly in the expat workplace, you're gonna have to develop what I call cultural agility. To how important is this in your team? Is it going to be good, or is it going to rub?
Yeah.
And who's going to have to find the way to work through that? So
No, and I think it's also interesting that you mention Erin Meyer and the culture map. Just because I have the book here, and I was looking in the directory for New Zealand, and I only found it mentioned once or twice.
yeah,
And it was mentioned like that's what I mentioned earlier about Anglo-Saxon, because that's how it was mentioned. It was mentioned
yes,
as part of the Anglo-Saxon culture,
yeah,
meaning if you look at something that, at least for me, if you look at something like a dimension that is often mentioned in any research about culture, is the femininity, masculinity sort of part of a culture, where you have egalitarian cultures and stuff like that. And New Zealand is interesting because actually it scores as very masculine, especially if you look at something like a typical Anglo-Saxon culture. So it could be easily misunderstood, I think, for someone that is looking at it from the outside before moving to New Zealand, thinking that, and I want you to tell me a little bit about this, because we can see that you had a female prime minister that took charge during a difficult time, and it was a global phenomena, the way she led the people and everything through there. And I think you just see that, and my experience as well living there, that is a very egalitarian society. At university, there's a lot of female professors everywhere, and it's very down to earth, the way we greet each other and talk to each other. And it's like I didn't really see that masculinity in that sense that maybe some research would sort of put high on that dimension. And I think that can be a misunderstanding, or is it a misunderstanding? Tell us a little bit about that, if you have any.
I'd say that we're more egalitarian than masculine in some sense, but again, this is complex. We can't put people in boxes and countries in boxes, in the sense that it my thinking around that is, firstly, who wrote the book and where did the research come from? A lot of research on culture has come from majority American lenses. So it's shaped by their lenses of what's observed here. Grassroots, again, it's hard to say. Who do you ask will reveal how they see the world, because we see the world through our eyes, not through facts. We're often very proud of being the first to get women to vote. So women's suffrage. And the last Prime Minister, Dame Jacinda Ardern, was not the first female leader. She is probably the most well known in how she led, which was with compassion, as well as a feminine side. But she was actually the third or fourth. You have Helen Clark, you had Jenny Shipley. So I think it's more feminine, because at one point in time, the top 4 leaders in the country were women. So our Chief Justice, our Governor General, the last 2 were women. So there is a lot of opportunity. Now, having said that, it's interesting, just as the world is wrestling with women in leadership, we still see the gap in business. We are doing quite poorly with having female chief executives, although I would say 3 or 4 of our largest banks are now led by women. But it's still an ongoing, I guess, journey. And what is the answer? Is it 50-50? I don't know those questions. But I think one of the things is that it is possibly more feminine than masculine. But there's still a masculine side because we're a farming culture, we're, egalitarian. And I think, again, I see culture as dynamic. So in times of stress, you revert back to type. So there's been, I don't know if there's evidence about it, but a lot of people are talking about the fact that our female leaders and politicians get critiqued and are criticized far more than our male politicians for being who they are. And I think I saw several news articles in Europe about your female prime ministers and so there is a higher standard, it would appear. And to me, that's something to challenge and ask why.
Yeah, and I think it's a global phenomena. Being from Scandinavia, we are very egalitarian, at least on the outset. But we are Norway also recently had a female prime minister. She did really well for many years, and but obviously, probably, and I didn't really look into it like you did, but criticized that in a different way than a male counterpart would have been, right? So it's an interesting.
There seems to be a double standard, but again, it's both individual perception as well as collective perception. And the challenge with culture is who said that and how it has become something that everyone's owned. So it's an interesting dynamic. But I mean, the world's a pretty scary place in 2024, and so we are being pushed into behaving in certain ways where we may not necessarily have chosen to or thought to.
Yeah. Now let's move on to a little bit more of it's not a negative note we're talking about, it's an interesting note, but I wanted to progress a little bit in our conversation and go over to talk a little bit about, you mentioned a little bit already about career, sort of, work-life balance. But I'm curious in general sense, because if you say, or you said earlier, that there's a big brain drain in New Zealand. I know that from when living there. So it was a big topic at university when I studied HR. And is that something that is still the big truth, that a lot of people, when they're young, they go to a school, they start the educational journey, university, start working, and then the goal is to move out, or they happy to sort of stay put? And this is very generalizing, obviously, but what is sort of the common theme here, or trend that is sort of happening in New Zealand?
If you listen to the media, oh yeah, it's the big brain drain, and everyone's going to Australia and beyond because our pay rates and everything is not up to standard. And so the last year, end of the year, they're saying everyone's leaving to go to Australia. But I don't know how much of that is a full story, because as a migrant myself, leaving a country and moving to somewhere is hard to do. And if money and is your motivation, it can only carry you so far, because culture and acceptance and being comfortable in where you live, and being able to just relax is something that's a gift. So there are people going abroad, by very nature, because we're a small country, and some of our brightest and most brilliant people have gone to the global stage.
And I think that,
And
that's sorry, I just
something to
wanted to say that what I'm trying to sort of come to here is is a Kiwi very ambitious? Are they looking to sort of develop themselves professionally, or are they more family oriented? And what I mean?
Yeah, some. So I would say that there are some who are ambitious. Most, I would, again, these are all stereotypes, but
Yep.
travel to see the world, because there is that curiosity and wanting to see what the world has. Some do seek greater ambitions. Our current prime minister went abroad. Oh, the last two like male prime ministers were ambitious. They worked in the New York Stock Exchange and stuff. So there are those as well. Um, and the ones that choose to stay probably for lifestyle and family reasons. So
Mm.
so there is a different pace of life here. Um, it, I think we're at 4 weeks annual leave here, on top of your public holidays. And I understand in America it's 2 weeks. So the work-life balance is why many choose to live here.
Yeah.
And so it's still a 40-hour working week here. And in some sense, I mean, that's again a generalization, but weekends are family time and recreation time. Hit the beach if you're close to a beach, or, you know, the outdoors. So that's kind of the culture here. And when folk go abroad, it's for career opportunities, and also to see the world. So there is to a degree, there always is a brain drain. After you graduate, like you came here to study, many go abroad to work, and whether they come back depends on how successful they are abroad.
Yeah.
So the Kia New Zealand network captures a lot of those professionals that still have a strong sense of being a Kiwi, but hey, they work in London now.
Yeah.
Or they're in Australia, and today's world, the global village, you've got this amazing amount of people movement that's enriching the culture, particularly if they have a choice for it. Those that don't, who are displaced, have a different context.
Yeah, absolutely. And I
Um,
think it's interesting, obviously, as we have mentioned many, many times about New Zealand, is that you have that differences within the country that is very evident with some of my understanding at least, and from my friends in New Zealand, which are actually funnily mostly Maori. Then
yeah,
most of my friends are Maori because they have this more communal family. They have
yeah.
bigger families, that for them to move abroad to do that sort of journey is more difficult because they have maybe a higher expectations of sort of taking care of the family than someone who is not.
And I think that's interesting that, and I think Māori are so hospitable. Part of their DNA is just you're one of us,
Yeah,
especially if you're just, wanting to be curious about who they are. And I know I've experienced incredible embrace to that, and I've, learned my pepeha. And I'm next year or this year I'll be starting further in-depth study in Te Reo Māori,
yeah,
because that's what's happening here. So in one sense, if they move, the family moves. So that's why there's a whole group of folk that have gone to Gold Coast, or in Australia. And I think there's also clusters around the world, but they don't necessarily move as much as the young Kiwis that go abroad to work in OEs and stuff. So,
no,
but I think today's world is such a different world.
yeah,
You know, anyone that does want to move can.
yeah,
Um, if they're at a push.
yeah,
And so it makes culture and studying culture, and also experiencing culture at work, or leisurely, something that now we are becoming more aware of. But we also need to understand the nuances that come into play, because, uh, yeah, for every case study that I tell you, there might be 5 others that are different. And you go, hang
yeah,
on a minute, I'm not that. Why is she talking about New Zealand culture? Can't you get a Kiwi, Paul? A real Kiwi to talk to you.
yeah,
um, and so there's always going to be, well, how Kiwi do you have to be to talk about this? So I guess my heart on this is that, all of us, be able to be curious about anyone and everyone,
mm,
how they see the world, Why do they do what they do? It's shaped by where they were born, where they are now, the life experiences that they've had. But all of us live here in this world. So we're all multi-dimensional human beings, unique in one way.
Absolutely.
Your experience is not one that any Norwegian has. So you're not Norwegian, but you so much more. And what would
Yeah.
it look like for our world, in our workplaces, if we just delve deeper and deeper? Be curious, be humble, be open to mistakes and stuffing up, but unlocking the richness that it can bring to your teams and organizations wherever in the world you are, and even when you visit New Zealand.
Absolutely. And this is I think I work in HR and
Yeah.
with HR, and I do speak to a lot of leaders, especially young startup founders and everything, about the
Yes.
cultural awareness that you're mentioning now, like to be curious about the people in your team. And I think this is also where I will go to the next question, that is, because I know that just from my if you talk about the inner layer of me, like the innermost layer of what motivates me to stay in a job and sort of be engaged, at least at the workplace. And I wanted to ask you if you have any, call it any advice for if it actually exists, and I guess it does, because people have different, motivational factors that they like. A Norwegian, for example, is very wants to be left alone. Just give me a task and I will handle it. Don't stand like if you have to guide me, do that once and I'm happy. It's like with freedom comes responsibility, we call it. And there's a lot of Kiwis that have, as you said, left, and I guess there's a lot of them I know there's a lot of them in London, for example. And if you are working in a team, you might have someone who comes from, born and raised in that culture. Do they bring something like this with them? Is there anything specific that is detrimental to the motivation, or not detrimental, but something that can sort of inhibit their best? Is there something that you should think about if you have someone from New Zealand in your team?
Well, again, I can't speak for the ones that are in London anywhere. But in general, I think that for most people, when they're least valued, least trusted, and least empowered. Yeah. So the negatives, when you don't trust them, you don't empower them, and you don't value them, they don't shine. Particularly more so today, because your generational culture. There's clashes there, but even as a human being, I don't know about you, but when someone just goes, "You've done such a great job. Wow, we just love what you do," you want to do more. It's human. How the language is communicated is the bit you need to discover. So you need this intercultural intelligence and cultural agility to figure out this person in front of you, what motivates them. In New Zealand, it could be Fridays off. There was a massive campaign or research for the 4-day working week for the same pay. It's gone global now, but the guys that did the research on it showed that so much time is wasted that actually you can hire someone and, where possible, give them a 4-day working week because life is busy. Now, most bosses and organizations will go, "That's not possible. I run a call center." Now, today's world is such that the complexity is that this is the status quo. Find a solution together that is unique, rather than say, "Oh no, it's not going to work." So today's employees, wherever they are in the world, that's according to my research, is that they want to be heard, seen, respected, and valued. What is the currency? Is it time? Is it more money? Is it working together on projects? It's shifting it from the differences to creating common purpose, and with safety, unlocking that. So Kiwis from here will bring some of their background to your workplace, and some of that we talked about is characteristically, they'll solve problems, but not all do. So don't stay in the stereotypes would be my suggestion.
Yeah, I think it's interesting sometimes also thinking about the stereotype, because it just you mentioned the tall poppy syndrome, and if I can compare it to what is the law of Jante in Scandinavia, where I would never be the loudest in an office setting. I would never be the one who sort of bangs the drum and says, "Look at me, look what I did." I would be more reserved. And if you have a leadership style where you want to have like a sales team or something, that everybody's going to be, let's go to the top of this mountain and bring everybody forward. As a leader, you might find it maybe frustrating if you hire someone and you have that expectation of them. And one of the reasons this is actually kind of interesting today, I read a lot of job descriptions where they say, "Oh, we need you to be extroverted, this, and you need to be this and that," and it just really doesn't click with me, for example, sometimes if I look at this, because I'm not that naturally. I've just been
Yeah.
raised to be more humbled about, like, I want to be more in the background. Is that also true? I mean, it's changing, obviously. I said culture is all about being in front of everybody now, but maybe you still keep a little bit of that from the Kiwi
I think
culture?
so. I think it's I mean, we're probably restrained would be the word. I don't think most would say how awesome they are. Even our Olympians and the people that weren't, they've won the Rugby World Cup. You don't see them boasting. The ones it's just not something one does. So when it does come to job descriptions, I think one of the things is the job description reveals more about the person hiring and the company organizational culture than the person that's applying, because it's a two-way street, and today's professionals are also checking out the companies that they work for. Um, and I have heard of people that go, "Oh no, I'm not even wanting to work there. They don't do this, and that's against my values." So there's greater awareness and agency amongst your professionals, particularly with the rise in global talent shortage. All around the world, we're looking for talent, and so bosses and companies now need to really figure out how to actually attract the quality people and keep them.
Yeah.
And again, culture, organizational culture, plays such a key part in that. And it takes leadership to start to go, hey, it's not just about we're so good, come and work for us. It's like, no. We've got to work hard at making this the best place ever.
Yeah. No, it's
Yeah.
true. And I think in many ways it's when we talk about cross-cultural management practices, and it's also just to think about this as a diversity. Like you create a diverse workforce like within your company. And then that means that having an understanding, cultural awareness in like like we talk like the sort of the learning about cross-cultural practices is you can adopt that to create diverse workforces, because there's a lot of things that, especially about learning about being aware of someone's inner needs and wants and sort of motivational things, it will help you. And I think that it will help the organization and the leader to get a better performing team and happier team and more motivated team.
And hiring for fit, because you get actually, I would say don't hire for fit, because you get groupthink.
Yeah.
And the evidence shows that you hire for fit, everyone goes, "Oh, sorry, that didn't fit the culture." So who are you wanting? Someone the same, because culture is such that you got to toe the line or you get out. But how about creating a safe space for people with different experiences and perspectives and values to come in? Because this is the journey of the sweet spot. You start here, you've got a highly functioning monocultural team, but they only can go so far, because the deep diversity, so not your demographic, not your visible, not your national identity, but all the things we talked about, the values, our worldviews, our personalities, and how we process, that comes after the job interview. When you work in team. Now, if you go, "Oh, there's problems, get rid of that person," you haven't got there. You got to work together, build each other, create psychological safety, inclusion and belonging. And those teams with the right management will outperform any monocultural team. And the sweet spot of that is the creativity, the innovation, the engagement, the retention that every company works. But it's not a switch. It's a ongoing journey of culture making in your organization and your team that you need to be aware of. So it's a dynamic process. What behaviors do you want to amplify and what do you want to stop is as simple as that. So my, and today you don't have a choice, because the world is so diverse now that you will hire differently.
Yeah, and I think it's very easy to get into. That's why I mentioned a job description, because today most companies, especially the people I speak to that are young startup founders, I call them young, like they're early startup founders. They started a company and they want to hire someone. They find a job description online, they copy it. So, oh, I need that person to be this and that, and they're just like, is that really the people you really want to come in? Look at yourself. Like, look at yourself. Who are you? And all of a sudden, you're going to build this team of people. Like, if you're super introverted yourself and you're going to build a team full of extroverted people, you're going to have a very weird culture in your company. Instead of thinking about this, as you said, we are so diverse. Like, we are so different. We are coming from different parents, different schools, educational backgrounds, struggles in life, this and that. And we bring so much value that you should think about this.
Go towards purpose. What is the purpose? Your organization core vision and purpose. And I don't see that much. I mean, I was just looking at some job descriptions, and it's been fascinating because, again, like I said, job descriptions, you're writing it for someone. So in New Zealand, they'll be writing it for, we want the person to be takes initiative, and so for a lot of my Asian friends and colleagues, where initiative taking is not something that they have been exposed to, or so they fit every part of the criteria, but they fall in that and go, oh, you can't teach initiative taking. I said, have you tried? Because today's world, the job description is only a guide. You'll never get someone that fits it perfectly, because whoever applies, there is a pool that you go to.
Yeah. No, it's
So
true.
it's a fascinating dynamic, but I think today's world requires us to go deep, that we have to process and think deeper than just that. And
absolutely. And I think it's and then I like learning about culture, and I think it helps just to have an understanding of every culture, because they have so much value that they bring to a team, and you can maybe take advantage of that in some sense. I mean, it's very small details, but it can be something. Just because we are getting up on time here, is there anything you wanted to say, anything you wanted to mention that we haven't talked about that you had prepared before, or is there anything else that you think is interesting for the reader, the listener to learn about New Zealand, or anything that might be maybe a misconception you hear often that you want to clarify?
I haven't heard many misconceptions in terms of out there. Generally, I hear good things, that Kiwis are hardworking, they're very friendly people, and they're scattered all around the world. They're intrepid and explorers, so they travel and explore. And in New Zealand, we see the world coming to us as well. Whether it's in tourism, international education, or business, I coach expats coming in here, and the world is coming here for what we offer, which is a slower pace of life, the nature and the beauty here. So we are in a world that is fluid and dynamic and changing. So I guess if there's anything, the last words I say is, wherever you are, be curious about the people in front of you. Be curious about them more than their nationality, and find out who they really are. Because when you do, that's where you hit goal. So often people start with me and they go, where are you from? And I'll say, oh, my Turanga Wawa is from Palmerston North. And there's always this, no, you are from China. I was like, I've never been to China. Palmerston North is where I found myself when I studied in university, just as you did in Auckland AUT. And so our stereotypes can lead us the wrong way, but when the people that recover and find out more and be curious become really rich friends and colleagues. Whereas those that go, oh no, you should be from China, you don't get anywhere. So my whole professional journey and what I do in my research and my teaching and my facilitation is to get people to go, hey, I'm Shireen, the Chinese. That's one part of me, but get to know me as Shireen, not the Chinese. So be curious, be open to your stereotypes to be challenged in your hiring, your meeting of any Kiwi, and you might make some amazing friends like you already have.
Absolutely. It changed. I think it also changed me quite a lot to live there and just to have that openness. And it was for me, it was the first long long-term experience abroad, and I really learned to appreciate different cultures and people in a different way than if I never left my home country. So that's difficult for a lot of people, and actually brings me to the last point I have here. Do you have any recommendation, anything that people can sort of tune into? Could be like a really good book or maybe a movie or series or whatever that can sort of give you a little bit of a snapshot of, it doesn't have to be just the personality of someone from New Zealand, because a little bit about the culture. And I want to mention one first, maybe you had the same one, because it's a very good movie, which for me at least says a lot about the humor of the Māori people, and that's the movie Boy. And it's a very funny movie, and it's a very good movie, and the director of that movie has gone on to become a very big Hollywood director and movie star. So Boy is a movie I would recommend. I think it's a very good, funny movie.
I think more recently, The Hunt for the Wilder People is one that also talks about the rural life, and the humor that came out of that. So that's something everyone seems to be watching before they come to New Zealand. We're known for the movie set of The Lord of the Rings, not necessarily the culture. But the more serious ones, Fina, which is the Lady Dame Fina Cooper, talks about her life story. But out of that, you see the land march, or how the Māori people fought back for the land that they lost. That gives you a sense of history. Other sides of Kiwi humor, Flight of the Conchords, talk a little bit about the Kiwi restraint kind of thing. And if you want to hear music, you Crowded House, Tim Finn, Dave Dobbin would probably be our local hero. So you hear a lot of the themes, and if you fly into New Zealand, they often play Welcome Home, which is what Dave Dobbin will play whenever we win the America's Cup again. Like they use that as a anthem to celebrate people coming back to New Zealand. So those are a few of the ones that I can think of. We don't have any quintessential ones like the Australian. You go, oh, you need to watch The Castle. It was like, well,
what's it called? Is it Shortland Street? No, that's the British one.
Yes. So Shortland Street is still going 20 something years later. So Neighbours is finished, but Shortland Street is still young. So that's still going. And there is some sense of Kiwi culture in there, although I don't know if it really represents New Zealand. It represents what the producers or the writers want to tell you.
Exactly.
So it's I mean, I think the best way to find out if they can is come visit, for a shorter or long-term experience. We're seeing a lot more expats coming in for short-term placements, or longer term if it's possible with work. And like you leave different people. But yeah, in terms of books, I can't think of any off the top of my head that are quintessentially New Zealand. But yeah, movies, you've got Boy, The Whale Rider. So there's been some really amazing ones done about Māori culture. I can't think of any off the top of my head. Sione's Wedding is one about Pacific Island culture. So yeah, being very little, we don't have much, lots and lots of movies that
No, but it's some of these movies are brilliant, and I also want to mention on the music, because I was just thinking about when you mentioned that in New Zealand there's a genre of music that's very big, and it's the dub. It's basically a slow reggae type of.
Yeah.
I don't want to butcher what the genre is, but it's what sort of puts, for me, when I listen to that music, I go back to New Zealand. It's sort of the slow sort of life you live there. It's sort of the nature of the people. And
And we've had some really amazing authors that have written. One of them, Eleanor, she won the really large Pulitzer Prize, but I can't think of her. So yeah, but I mean, we've been known in the past for the likes of Catherine Mansfield in the old era, but also here we've got different kind of cultures. We've got a few winemakers now that are really punching above their weight. Sam Neill owns a vineyard as well as as a movie
yeah,
theater
no,
movie
I
star.
mean, just I love New Zealand. I would highly recommend, if you go there, stay more than a week. You have to explore the country. You need at least
Yes,
2 weeks.
I
Travel
would say so.
everywhere, because Auckland is just one part of it, and it can be very overwhelming and big when you come there, but then you just go to the north or you go to the south island, and just you're gonna see so much beauty and so many very friendly people, and it's a beautiful country, and I highly recommend going there and then just explore.
One of the other things to note is it's 2 degrees of separation in New Zealand. That's a very typical thing of I mean, I just think how we met, Paul, it was through someone else that followed you. And in New Zealand, do not be surprised if you meet someone that knows someone else. We're just that small. And so if anyone comes here, reach out on LinkedIn to me, and you may find that you know others, and in any way, we are most happy to welcome you here, and also give you some tips or connect you however and whenever you want to. So if you're coming here professionally, there are a bunch of networks that certainly I can put you in touch with. And if you're coming here for a holiday, got some friends that run great tour experiences and things that I can hook you up with as well.
Yeah. So how do they reach you then? Let's end with that. How can people get in touch with you if they're interested in
Probably
talking to you?
best platform will probably be LinkedIn. You'll find me on LinkedIn. My name's Shireen, Shireen, and my surname's Chua. And so you'll find me there, or on Paul's LinkedIn page. Follow Paul and find me.
Yes, you will find her there as well.
And I also have a website called thirdculture.co.nz, which is in the process of being updated. So you'll see me there when I put my photo up soon.
Brilliant. And she has also a TED Talk that you should check out on YouTube.
Oh, right. Yes.
Yeah, I looked at that. It's a fascinating presentation there as well. You should definitely check that out. So
Thank you.
yeah, I will link everything in the show notes to this episode, and so you will find recommendations there, the details to connect with Shireen, and anything else we talked about. So thank you again, Shireen, for your time. Super valuable conversation. Takes me back to New Zealand. Obviously, I love it deeply. I have a big affection for the culture there, and the only thing I sort of wish, but I can't do anything with, is that it's so isolated. It's so far away from everything. So like life is sort of difficult to just move there for a while when you're young and have family to take care of. But it's definitely a consideration to come in the future.
Well, come and visit in the short term if you can't live here. But there are many that come, for different reasons. Yeah. Family ties make it harder and harder. And I know my family's a global family. But I came when I was 12, so
Yeah.
they left me.
Well, family is something that really can't get rid of. They are
Yes.
sort of stick around until
And
you leave it.
so it's yeah, it's a special place. Yeah.
It's
In
absolutely a special
some
place.
ways.
And okay, well, thank you very much. Now it's late for you, so enjoy the rest of
Anytime.
your evening.
I love wrestling and talking about this whole space and learning and researching it because I think it's such a powerful thing. Culture is what glues us together, but it can also be what makes or breaks us some ways. So yeah.
Absolutely. Let's end with
We
that.
often say, yeah, let's end with that. And we often say mā te wā as you leave the Air New Zealand aeroplane, it says until we meet again. So
Until we
and I
meet
hope we
again.
do.
We will. Thank you, Shireen. Have a good day.
Good
Bye-bye.
night.